So just on Eberici Eze going to QPR on Saturday, obviously there's been a lot of publicity. What was your reaction and how disappointing was it after Luca's New Year's Eve?
Yeah, it was very disappointing, of course. I think it's a lot of naivety on his part, thinking it was okay to do those things. It obviously isn't, and we're very upset about it and a bit disappointed too that he wasn't actually stopped from going. And I know that QPR have done well in that respect. They've taken some responsibility because, of course, had we known he planned to do that, we would have stopped it. But he's apologised, of course. He'll certainly learn a harsh lesson from it, and we will have to act internally to take measures to make certain that it's a lesson that he's well and truly learned.
Well, just on government and COVID protocols generally, really, because the government and the Premier League, they don't want celebrations now. They don't want shirt swapping. They don't want hugs, high fives or handshakes. How realistic and important is it that those kind of things are taken out of the game right now?
Well, that's a very good question, Joe. The only thing is, I think it's easier for us all to agree that it would be good if they could be taken out of the game and that we could follow the protocols absolutely to the letter. But I think when you're playing a game of football, and don't forget people have got ingrained habits, I still fear that whatever we say, however much we push the point and however much we labour the point, when a goal is scored, the emotion, the joy of that goal being scored, there's a risk that players will still run to each other. I think some of the other things about the handshaking and swapping of shirts, for that you could really say there's no excuse. And you could also say, I suppose, that there's no excuse for celebrating a goal. But it's one thing to agree with the principle and another thing to try in some way to stop it happening. I don't know what the referees could do in that area. And I don't know what we as managers and coaches can do more than to keep hammering home the protocols and principles we're being given. Yeah,
right. Just on the injuries then for Arsenal, Roy, any of your injured players going to be available for Thursday night? And what's the latest on Sako after Wolves on Friday night?
Yeah, he's still being actually, what's the right word? Analysed is not the right word. We're still looking into the extent of his injury. There'll be a few more MRI scans, I think, necessary before we know exactly how bad that injury was. But certainly it's an injury that's going to keep him out of the game on Thursday and even the one at the weekend. And the other injured player is Jeffrey Schlupp, that everyone now knows about. And then, of course, we still have the ones that have been injured for a period of time, like Hennessy, Wickham and Ferguson. But otherwise, Gary Cahill is back in training, so we're happy with that. And basically, from the team that's been playing, it's really Jeffrey Schlupp and Mamadou Sako.
Is Cahill fit to play at Arsenal?
Yes, he is.
And Roy, just on the window, obviously Palace fans are wondering about players who are nearing the end of their contract, possibly being moved on. I know Dougie's dealing with it, but what can you say? And what can you say about players like Nathaniel Klein, whose deal's up at the end of this month, of course?
Well, I think Nathaniel Klein's just about to sign a deal with us, so I think that problem, if you like, is not a problem because the negotiations have been going on, and I'm led to believe it's very close now to Nathaniel signing. So that certainly doesn't worry me, that one. But there are a lot of other players who, as you rightly say, are out of contract at the end of the year, and as yet it doesn't seem a clear decision has been made whether or not to offer them new contracts or not. And these are discussions which are going on behind the scenes with some intensity between Doug Friedman and the player and his agent.
Okay, and just finally on Arsenal, Roy, your record in the last 4 against them is pretty good. 3 draws and a win. How confident are you going up there and getting something again, given their resurgence recently?
Yeah, I think that's the point, Jeremy. I think it's the resurgence and the way they're playing very well. I think they've got a lot of very good players. They're extremely dangerous in the attacking phases of the game, and they're not letting many goals in either. So we're meeting them actually at a good time for them because they're in excellent form and they must have very, very high confidence levels. But I suppose we can take some heart and solace from the fact that the last games against them haven't gone badly. But for me, they are still one of the top teams in the country. And any time you play them, you have to be ready for what they're going to throw at you. And I'm expecting them to throw a lot at us on tomorrow night.
Thanks, Roy. Good luck.
Pleasure. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. We'll move on to Sam at PLP.
Hello, Roy. Nice to see you. Just carrying on that theme, really. I know you mentioned Arsenal's upturn in form there. Obviously, it was at 1.5 defeats and 7 for them, 3 in a row in the Premier League. Now, what would you put that resurgence, that upturn in form down to?
I think it's just 1 second, sir. Right, okay. Message is there for me not to say things, but that's quite easy. I don't say that much anyway, but there's nothing really interesting on that message that I was just given. I'll go back to your question. What do I put it down to? Well, I only put it down to the fact that I never really expected them to do anything other than recover from the unfortunate start they had. You know, looking at the squad, looking at the way Mikel Arteta has been working with them, looking at the way they play, their principles and the quality of the club and its star, I never really expected anything other than sooner or later they would come back to being the Arsenal that we know them to be and expect them to be, and they'll be closer to the top of the table than the bottom of the table. So it's no surprise, and I don't think you need to put it down to anything other than the fact they obviously have continued to work very hard. They've not allowed their confidence to be totally dented by a bad run of games, and that they've always believed that this good spell of games would come. And for us, it's somewhat unfortunate that we meet them in the middle of it.
Yeah, Mikel Arteta was glowing about you the other day, full of praise. He said that what you've done in football management is exceptional. He also said that football management is like a drug that you can't get out of your system. Would you go along with that? Is that a pretty fair assumption?
Yeah. I guess that to still be here after so many years would prove his point with a vengeance in a way, because if it was a drug you could get out of your system, then perhaps I would have done so long ago. But it's a good drug, and it's a drug that we've definitely chosen to take, all of us, because we love the game so much and we are so passionate about what we do. And I think you're very fortunate if you're able to do it for as long as I've been able to do it. It's not going to be easy for the younger managers coming through, because the pressures don't get any easier with the years. The stress levels don't get any less. But as I said, I think I've been privileged and very lucky to have been in it for as long as I have been, and I'm still enjoying it, and I'm hoping it will continue for some while to come.
Just finally from me, Roy, games coming thick and fast, of course, but a win would take you above Arsenal in the league. What would that do to your season?
Well, I think already to have the 22 points is somewhat comforting, but we know now to build on that, we've got to get points from Arsenal and Manchester City away from home. So we know how big that challenge is and how difficult that challenge is going to be. But the great thing is that we do it on the back of the 22 points that we already have. And that means that to some extent the knife is taken from the players' throats, and we can hopefully trust our play, trust our own form, trust the quality of players that we have, to make certain that we can give both of these teams a very, very good game. And if you're able to do that and you're well prepared, in every game of football, things happen. Sometimes they happen for you, sometimes they happen against you, but you're always hoping that you're good enough to stay in the game and enable those bits of fortune, if they're out there, to go your way.
Thanks, Roy.
Pleasure.
Thanks, Sam. We'll move to Alex Howell from BBC Sport.
Hi, Roy.
Thanks.
You're unbeaten in the last 2 Premier League games. Do you feel like you're coming to some sort of form within the league now?
I think 2 games is a bit of a small sample, really. I don't know that I should be boasting about the fact that we're 2 games unbeaten. I think to get a run of games together, you need a lot more than 2. And of course, unfortunately for us in the league, every time we get maybe a couple of games that we're happy with in terms of back-to-back results, suddenly you find yourself going to somewhere like Arsenal or Manchester City. So we know how difficult it's going to be to keep that run going, but it's nice to have those 4 points in the bag, and nice, as I've just said, to at least have 22 points behind us, so that we know that we aren't floundering at the moment. We still have reason, I think, to be relatively confident and to believe that we can go to both of these very difficult stadia, played against absolute top teams, and give ourselves a chance of coming away with a result.
And just to touch on, speaking about Arteta, there was a bit of pressure on him with the results. As a manager yourself and been through it many times, is that why it's so important not to get carried away when things are going well?
I think it's important in those instances. It's very quick these days for people to react. Every time a team doesn't quite get the results that people believed that they were going to get, people turn against the manager. But I think in that instance, the manager needs to be strong. The players also need to be strong and accept that football throws these cases up on a regular basis. But most importantly of all, the people at the top of the club need to be strong. They appointed Mikel Arteta, knowing what a good coach and manager he is and can continue, if you like, to be as his career continues, and that he was the right man for the job. And I think it's very important that when that noise starts, people have got to be very strong and put their earplugs in or put their headphones on and make certain that they concentrate on what they know is the right thing to do. And it was pretty obvious to me early on that the right thing to do when this noise was swirling around was to keep faith in the manager that they'd worked very hard to bring to the club, to keep faith in the players, many of whom are very, very good players, and to believe that this too will pass. Because unfortunately, in the world of football, we're not divorced from the world in general. And when things go against you, it is very important to continue believing in what you're doing and to accept the old mantra that this too will pass. It's not such a bad one to have at times.
And just finally from me, Roy, what is it that Arsenal do well?
Well, at the moment, they're doing everything well. They're defending well. They're not letting many goals in. But most importantly of all, if you look at the attacking options they have and the quality of their attacking players, you are talking about people of the highest European level. And, sometimes a player who is that good has a moment where things aren't quite going his way, but that doesn't last for long periods of time. So you can be sure that if they've had a barren period, they're going to come back strongly, and that barren period won't last. So I think that they use their playing material very well. They're organised. They play to the strengths of the team, and they give the very good players to have a chance to show how good they are and what they can do. And as an opponent, you have to analyse that and try and prepare your team as best you can to make certain that you aren't caught out in any way.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thanks, Alex. We'll go to James from TalkSport.
Hi, Roy. How you doing?
Hi, James.
Roy, it's obviously good news to hear that Nathaniel Klein is close to signing a contract extension. How pleased have you been with him since he's come back to the club?
Yeah, I've been delighted. I mean, it's obviously we signed Nathan Ferguson because we only had one right back at the club, and that's been the case for quite a long period of time, which is an enormous burden on Joel Ward. Well, that he's done to be aware that if he doesn't play, we don't really have the right person who could go in his place. So Nathan then, of course, came to us injured and picked up another bad injury. So it was quite vital, I thought, for us to try and get someone in who could compete with Joel and be there to play if Joel wasn't available to play. And Matthew has done that with flying colours, really. And we have only doubt about him anyway. It was, how fit is he going to be? He hasn't played for a long time. And is he going to be the Nathaniel Klein that I knew playing for England and Crystal Palace knew from the time when he played here? And that's exactly what he's been. So he's done exceptionally well. And I'm delighted, of course, that the club have been able to see their way to negotiating a new contract.
And as has been mentioned before, there are a number of players who are out of contract in the summer. Are you concerned that any uncertainty, if these issues are left to go on, may have any effect on morale in the camp and performances?
Well, I probably would lie if I said it's not a concern. Of course, it's a concern. Everybody would really like the ideal scenario where every player is comfortable, every player's tied up to the club for a long period of time. But it doesn't happen very often. There's always a situation that most managers will find themselves in. But you're right in pointing out that our situation is a little bit different because we have so many of these players. But I know that the chairman and Doug Freeman, the sporting director, are very much aware of the situation. They're working hard to try and find the right solutions when it comes to the players who are out of contract. So I just have to trust that and get on as best I can with the players who are out there every day working with me. And touch wood, so far they've been excellent, and I haven't seen any suggestions of a lack of morale or a lack of motivation or a lack of interest just because a player is actually currently involved perhaps in the contract negotiations with the hierarchy.
And just finally from me, you mentioned that Eberechi Eze, there'll be an internal punishment. Do you think leaving a player out would ever be a suitable sort of punishment for the crime, I guess, that he's committed?
I think it'd have to be individual basis. There's no doubt about that. And if you're asking me on this occasion, do I think that the foolish thing Eberechi did merits that he should be left out of the team and punished in that way, then I don't. I don't think that what he did would merit that type of punishment. But it does merit a fine because, you know, a slap on the wrist isn't really enough. He's got to understand that we take this very seriously. We don't want any of our players involved in any way connected to breaches of the coronavirus rules that are being put out there, which so many people are working hard to respect. So when something happens where one of our players is shown to have not respected it, even though I think he did it naively and foolishly, I don't think it was a determined gesture on his part to go out and break a rule, but he did break a rule, and he's been made very much aware that we take that seriously. We're not happy with him at all, and the only way we can really show that is by fining him, which is something which I personally am not a big fan of during the years. I think any player who's worked with me will say that I'm not one to go straight to the fines, but on this occasion, that's what I think this error of judgment that he's made deserves, and he needs to be very certain and very cautious. He doesn't make any other errors of judgment of this type in the future, because I can quite understand that for the public at large, they take clear exception to it.
Thanks a lot, Roy.
My pleasure.
Thank you. George, do you have a question from PA?
Hi, Roy. Just sticking with Eze, how was he on Monday? Did he sort of come in and, it seems like he's a really sort of bubbly character, but did he sort of come in and sort of go to you straight away and kind of apologise? And with that sort of excusing him, you're a bit disappointed as well, the kind of people closest to him, those people that would be around him, that have known him for years, didn't sort of point out that actually this probably isn't the best of ideas.
Well, good question, of course. I mean, how much you can rely upon people around him to point things out, especially the people you're perhaps referring to, and perhaps the ones who wanted him to come to the game and share the game with them. They're also young people. They also perhaps don't think things through as carefully as they should at times. So I don't know that I can hold my hand up and say I'm bitterly disappointed in them. But as far as Eberechi is concerned, when he realised that what he did, naively, I must point out again, and certainly without any malice or forethought, when he realised what he'd done, of course he was full of remorse and full of regret, and wanted to take responsibility for it and apologise to everybody, because it's not just a question of apologising to us and to the club. He does need to be aware that he needs to apologise to the public at large, because there are so many people that we know are suffering from these rules and regulations, and we have to accept in football that we are judged very, very acutely, if you like, with regard to all of our actions. So when you do something which is clearly wrong, you have to take responsibility and try to show that it wasn't something that you were intending to do in a malicious way, but it was something which you take responsibility for. He's done that. It's certainly given him a lot of things to think about with regard to how he's going to behave in the future. And we as a club, I think, have dealt with the matter internally. We put out a statement quite quickly afterwards, and I think that everything that is said in that statement really sums up how I feel about the situation.
Thanks, Roy.
Pleasure.
Thank you, George. I think that ends the broadcast section